Welcome to the Knockout Zone, where boxing is the language that we speak. Today, I want to talk about fighters, champions, who fought against dangerous contenders. You know, they say in order to be a champion, you've got to beat the champion. So, I want to talk about those champions that had difficult opponents.
The Knockout Zone.
Here I'm talking about Larry Holmes. If there is a category in boxing of great fighters and greatest fighters, Larry Holmes is one of the greatest heavyweights that we've ever had. He only comes second to Joe Louis in terms of title defenses. He has the most title defenses in the sense that he had 19 straight defenses. Like they always say, you have to beat the champion to become the champion. Larry Holmes did just that. He had the toughest contenders in boxing ever. And here I can tell you of fighters like Mike Weaver. You know, you are Larry Holmes and you've got to figure out how to fight this person in front of you because he is the toughest champion. Mike Weaver was also the WBA heavyweight champion at some point. So Larry Holmes had to go through that kind of a man. He also fought Kenny Norton. We know that Kenny Norton was a champion in his own right, a very good fighter, a very great champion. He was also a WBC heavyweight champion at some point. And Larry Holmes had to defend his title against someone as dangerous as Kenny Norton. And there was this great champion, Tim Witherspoon. You know, he was indeed terrible. Larry Holmes had to defend his title against Tim Witherspoon, who was also 2 times heavyweight champion. Tim Witherspoon had an excellent defense. So no wonder why Larry Holmes had a tough fight against him, and he won narrowly through a split decision because Tim Witherspoon was a wonderful, wonderful champion. Larry Holmes also had to go through Leon Spinks. Leon Spinks was a very quick heavyweight. We know that he defeated Muhammad Ali and became the undisputed heavyweight champion. And Larry Holmes had to go through that same man and make sure that he defends his title against him. So that is why I'm saying Larry Holmes is one of the heavyweight champions that had to go through the toughest contenders in the division. Larry Holmes had to face Evander the Real Deal Holyfield. And Holyfield is no joke. You know, he is the 4 times world heavyweight champion, and Larry Holmes had to fight against Holyfield. So you can see that he was indeed a great champion because he had to go through such tremendous contenders. Think about Trevor Berbick, the man who came into the ring with an idea to win the fight at all times. He was almost like a street fighter in my eyes, a Jamaican heavyweight who was very tough. And at some point, he was also the WBC heavyweight champion, and Larry Holmes had to go through such a man. Think about James Bone Crusher Smith, one of the toughest heavyweights I've ever seen. Larry Holmes had to fight against James Bone Crusher Smith, who was himself a former WBA heavyweight champion. He is a man that was not easy to defeat because he had the courage of a champion, and Larry Holmes had to face that mountain. He also came across Mike Tyson. We all know that Iron Mike Tyson is ever dangerous, and Larry Holmes had to fight him during the twilight of his career. Even though he lost to Mike Tyson, but it still stands that Larry Holmes had to fight difficult opponents in order for himself to become the champion that he was. Think about Ray Messer. They don't call him Merciless for nothing. He's a former WBO champion, and he gave Larry Holmes a run for his money. You know, Ray Messer is a hard puncher, a good fighter, and Larry Holmes had to face him in order for him to be called world champion. So Larry Holmes is indeed one of the greatest. Now, think about Any Shavers. How do you win against Any Shavers? The hardest puncher ever to enter the boxing ring. And there you are, Larry Holmes. You have to face him and make sure that you win against him. So Any Shavers was a dangerous fighter. I do know that he didn't have so much of a staying power, but even during the late rounds, whenever he catches you with a punch, you were sure to go down. He gave a lot of opponents difficult time. Whenever he landed those punches, you knew that it was lights out. And he did catch Larry Holmes with his punch, and he knocked him down, and it was surprising that Larry Holmes had to get up and fight again after having been caught by a punch from Annie Shavers, who is the heaviest puncher that boxing has ever seen. So if you are Larry Holmes and you had to become champion and you had to go through such difficult opponents, then you must be one of the greatest champions that the world has ever seen. Think about the young Ronaldo Snipes. Snipes is one of those fighters that I enjoyed watching. He had an awkward style of boxing, and he gave Larry Holmes a difficult fight, and he even dropped him, but Larry Holmes managed to get up because Snipes had a dangerous right hook. So he would just throw that right cross when you least expect, and it will catch you. And he did catch a lot of his opponents with that right cross, and they all went down. Even Larry Holmes went down, but him being Larry Holmes, the champion, he got back up and he fought his way up until he won the fight. As I am saying, he had to go through the toughest opponents. One of those toughest opponents he fought was Randy Tex Cobb, the man from Texas. One thing that I can say about Tex Cobb was that he is one boxer who had the hardest chin in boxing. No matter how hard Larry Holmes hit him, the man would not go down. So Larry Holmes had an uphill of opponents that he had to go through to be called. There was also this young, tall fighter called the Truth Williams. He gave Larry Holmes a tough fight because he was tall and jabbing and moving around. He was a good fighter, and Larry Holmes had to fight cleverly in order for him to win against called the Truth Williams. There's also a famous fight that he fought against Gary Cooney, highly contended fight. And Gary Cooney is the hardest puncher as well in boxing, one of the hard punchers in boxing. And Larry Holmes was able to defeat him, knocking him out in the 13th round. But it wasn't an easy fight because Gary Cooney was also a great champion himself. There are other champions that he fought, good fighters like Leroy Jones and David Bay. They were not easy opponents as well, and Larry Holmes had to fight cleverly to defeat them. So that is why I am saying Larry Holmes is one champion who had to face the greatest and the toughest contenders to become champion. So he is indeed one of the greatest heavyweight champions that boxing has ever seen.